Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I hope this video finds you in good spirits. Welcome to the V Principle Podcast. I'm your host, Ivory Hunter. And I have to be very honest and transparent. I'm super nervous because this is my first episode of the V Principle. And I'm going to be completely vulnerable during this podcast. This podcast was created, to make a difference in the world. I want to use the mistakes that I made and the mistakes that other men made to help others heal. So I'm going to introduce the V principle, the whole framework, how it works. And by the time you finish hearing today's episode, you will have a complete understanding what the V principle is and why this movement is so necessary today. Why it's been necessary, but even more so today, why we have to stay focused and we have to stay aligned. And in order to do that, I wrote some notes. So I will be reading a little bit today just to make sure that I don't miss any points that you guys really fully understand the V principle, my new book, because it started out as a book, but it became a movement. And it's becoming a movement, I should say. And I'm so grateful to be a part of it. And so let's jump into it. Like I said, I'm going to start this podcast off with a twist, all right? The V doesn't stand for what it normally stands for. It's going to stand for vulnerability today. I'm choosing to open up because this book and now this movement was born from me having the courage to tell the truth about my past, which started as a personal principle, became a movement, and then became my purpose. And the reason I created the V principle is simple. I made a lot of unconscious decisions that cost me years of my life. I hurt people. I hurt myself. I sabotaged myself. I wasted time. I created emotional debt. And I had to live through the karma of being off my path. That's where I discovered what I now call the V trap. The cycle of chasing validation, attention, lust, and temporary pleasure. And losing your focus, your peace, your purpose during this whole process. But recognizing the trap isn't enough. You have to escape that trap. That's why I created the V Raw, a daily check system to stay real, to stay accountable, and stay committed to winning through honesty and discipline. And I'm telling you that, this is a work in progress, and for me, I know that with the V Raw code, now I've stopped checking in. I stopped texting people because if I text somebody, I need to ask myself, why am I texting? What's my motive behind it? So this V Raw code is something that's set in place to keep us accountable so we don't lose our focus. And the truth is, to live by this code, you can't keep swerving. You can't go left and chase. You can't go right and waste. You have to stay alignment. You have to stay in the V zone. This movement is about men being vulnerable and sharing their healing journeys so other men can stop wasting years and start winning their lives back. And it's also meant to heal women, especially ones who never got closure, clarity, or answers. So if you're ready to stop chasing and start walking in your purpose, welcome. This is the V principle. Now this is that part, right? This is that part. In order for me to establish what the V principle is, I gotta be honest and I gotta be vulnerable. I am 55 years old. And this is the part that's hard because I've wasted years of my life. My dad used to tell me, I don't want you to be like me, I want you to be better than me. And for the most part, I understood that advice and I took that advice, but in certain ways, I fell into that V trap and repeated the cycle. And that didn't just happen just because I wanted to fall into this V trap and chase women and chase validation through sex and everything else. It happened because of my imprints, and imprints are important. Early on, I was molested by a family member, and I don't want to get too deep, but I just want to let you know that early on, I was molested, and that shaped me because at a very early age, and I know this stinks because I know I've talked to so many people that this has happened to, but when that happens, that trauma, and you don't look at it as trauma when you're young, it's because it's like an experience, but that is trauma and that shaped me because right then I was a very young boy and I was starting already to engage into sexual activities at a time where kids shouldn't be thinking about sex. But me, I was thinking about sex and I was addicted to it, so eventually, became that person that always looked to, either escape whatever's going on in my life, for sex, or just doing it because of the rush of what it felt like. And I wasn't realizing that I was just creating a pattern that would follow me into high school, into college, into manhood, adulthood. It just followed me. And it's been sad for me, honestly, because in the moments when it seemed fun, it really was causing a lot of damage. Not just damage to myself, but damage to others, because I hurt people, and that creates emotional debt. We'll get into that later. But I remember being at San Jose State University, and when I first got to California, I was big-eyed. I'm like, my gosh, I'm from the outskirts of Philly, Patterson, New Jersey. Here I am in California, the weather, all these beautiful women, different backgrounds. And so me being broken, I just went at it. Right there it started, this experience, sexual experience, one after another. And I remember one time, in this brokenness, and this is before like cell phones and all that stuff, I remember, and this is very sad to me when I think about this, but this is how, what you will find out later, the V-trap will, get you caught up in doing irresponsible, dumb things. There was this one person that I slept with, and, she was very loud, and so I recorded the sounds, and, not her, but I recorded the sounds of us, having sex. And when I played it in the locker room, all my teammates were going crazy, laughing, like, dang, Ivory did this. And then my coach walked in, and I got in trouble for that. And my gosh, I have so many regrets. So talking about this does not bring me pride. I've always been a womanizer, and I'm not proud of that. Man, I'm not proud of that. But I have to be honest, because I don't want other people to go through that experience and waste their life, their time, their purpose, sabotaging themselves and hurting others. So, I remember at the end of that year, I got called into my coach's office, and my coach was like, listen, Ivory, you're a good person, but I really feel like, you need to see some type of therapist, some type of counseling, because you have an issue with sex. And in order for you to come back to this team, I need you to see a therapist. And for me at that point, I was like, what? I thought he was crazy. I'm 20 years old, a therapist because I like to have sex? You crazy, coach. And then my uncle, I told him, he was living in the Bay Area at the time, an incredible man, but also a broken man. Even though he's a beautiful man, he was a broken man, because when he came down to talk to my coach with me, he looked at the coach and he was like, so you want my nephew to see therapy because he wants to get some, PUSSY? He was like, man, get out of here. Man, come on, nephew. You're going to go to another school. And we walked out of that office, and I felt so proud of my uncle that he stood up to my coach. But at the same time, looking back on it, that was a time where I was already broken. My uncle, who was broken and on that same path of women being older than me, pretty much validated my behavior by not holding me accountable. And, and when you're not held accountable through self or others, you just continue causing damage. And, I don't want to give everything away all today, in this first episode, but I just continue to, repeat the cycle. I left San Jose State, went to another college, and that cycle continued to repeat, hurting women, like knowing that a woman wanted more from me, but she settled because of the fact that, she just was willing to have just me, any part of me. And this is not an egotistical thing, but that's what people do. They want to hope that this person is going to change. A lot of women thought that they can change me, but nobody can change you. Nobody can change me. You have to change yourself. And if you don't see it, if you're not aware, you're going to continue that cycle. So I just continue the cycle of hurting people, creating emotional debt. And, it just took years and years of doing the same thing, like, attracting my dream woman. But when I attracted her, I was already dating somebody, and when I was dating that person, I didn't have the maturity, the responsibility to cut it off to give this other person that was my dream person a chance. Instead, I tried to balance two, because I was always used to juggling women, because when you're told early on, like, man, Ivory is the man, he's the man, he has a bad one, he has a bad this, a bad that, you get caught up into that, and you get caught up into that ego, and you're just feeding the brokenness by looking for validation, craving that validation that makes you feel like you're moving somewhere. And I did that for years, and it's horrible. And for me, this book was written, because I wanted to help men. But in writing this book, it became more than that. It became even a movement. Like, I just wanted to share. This is the first time ever in my life that I have written and something, and I wanted to speak about it because I know that this is my purpose. I know that there are so many people out there that are wasting their life, wasting their time, wasting their precious years, not staying focused, chasing sex, chasing validation, breaking hearts, creating emotional debt, losing focus. And that's why this book is so important. That's why this movement is so important. There's so many women that I wish I can go back and say sorry to. Like, I'm sorry that, I was irresponsible with your heart. I'm sorry that I wasted your time. I'm sorry that I was broken. And I know there might be people that say that's not an excuse, and you're right, it's not an excuse, but it's the truth. It's selfish, it's irresponsible. And, and I suffered, and they suffered, and they shouldn't have had to suffer for something that I did. I suffered because of always, coming up close to getting things accomplished in my life, but failing right before things are about to turn into a manifestation. And I had to start asking, like, why do things keep happening? Why am I so unlucky? No, you're not unlucky, Ivory. You created karma. You can't go around breaking hearts and expect for good things to happen to you. Men, understand that. Don't think you can go do what you want to do and you can just hurt people, sleep with people, lie to people, cheat on people, and the life is going to be smooth. It's going to come back, and it doesn't always come back the same way. And again, there's so many stories that I will get into later on, when I bring on other guests to talk about their stories. You will hear more of, how I messed up and, what I've learned from it. But now there's also a time to teach and a time to learn. And that's what this brings us to, the V principle. So I'm going to get into reading what the V principle is so I don't miss a point and so you understand it. And we can all start healing, and we can all start growing, we can all start living in our purpose. All right, let me break this down so there's no confusion about what the V principle is. Picture the letter V, all right? The letter V. The left side of the V represents chasing. The right side represents wasting. At the center, the bottom point of the V, that represents alignment. Most men don't realize that they're living on one side or the other. Let's start with the left side, all right? The left side of the V is chasing sex, chasing validation, chasing attention, chasing someone who isn't sure about you, chasing the feeling of being wanted. And here's what chasing really looks like. It looks like over-texting someone who barely responds. It looks like entertaining multiple women just to feel powerful. It looks like needing to prove to your friends that you can get her. It looks like confusing lust for love. It looks like saying, this is the last time, but still repeating the same pattern. Chasing feels like motion. It feels exciting. It feels active. It feels like you're doing something, but it's rooted in validation. And when you chase validation, you lose alignment because you no longer moving from purpose, you're moving from insecurity. And that's a tough one to swallow because people have always thought, damn, Ivory's so secure because he could do this. But deep down inside, I was insecure. That's why I was doing these things. That's why I did these things, because that made me feel validated. Insecurity that I carried, had to be overcome by sex. And that made me not feel insecure because I was able to accomplish something. And that is such a broken mindset. All right. Now let's talk about the right side of the V. That is the wasting side. Wasting time, wasting people's energy, wasting years in situations that you already know aren't aligned. This is when you stay with someone because it's convenient, because they're available, because you don't want to be alone, because you don't want to hurt them. So you slowly hurt them instead. You don't see a future. Your heart fully isn't in it, but you stay. That's wasting. And wasting creates emotional debt. Looks like guilt, over-explaining, broken trust, lost focus, karma that shows up later as stalled progress and missed opportunities. You can't be chasing on the left and you can't be wasting on the right. And you feel that emotional debt as it's happening, because there's been times you're in situations and you're trying to explain to a person, like, this is what it is. It's just, I'm not ready for a relationship. And you can see them and you can feel them, being disappointed, but you still go forward, and that doesn't feel good, but you still go forward, because I still went forward because I was so selfish and so broken. And again, I apologize to anybody that I've hurt in the past. I truly do. I apologize to people in person, but there's people that I haven't ever got the chance to apologize to, so I apologize. And for women, people out there who have been through this stuff, just understand that it's not personal. You were dealing with a broken person, and there was a part of you that was broken to accept that, to allow it. But we'll get into that later. Again, when you're chasing on the left, you're wasting on the right. But either way, you got to know that you're not centered, you're not aligned, and that's the V-trap. And the V-trap is not about being evil. It's about being unhealed. It's about trying to fill a void with sex, attention, or convenience instead of dealing with the root. Now here's where V-Raw comes in. I mentioned it earlier. V-Raw stands for real, accountable, and winning. Real means stop lying to yourself. You stop saying it's not that serious. You stop saying this is just how men are. You stop pretending you don't know you're out of alignment. You face the truth. Accountable means you own your choices. You stop blaming your past. You stop blaming women. You stop blaming temptation. You say, yo, this is on me. And winning means you choose to long-term alignment over short-term pleasure. Winning is not getting the girl. Winning is protecting your future. Winning is walking away when your ego wants to chase. Winning is telling the truth when it costs you something. V-Raw is the pause. It's the moment when you ask, why am I doing this? Am I chasing? Am I wasting? Am I aligned? And when you consistently practice V-Raw, something powerful happens. You start living in the V-zone. And the V-zone is the center of the V. It's alignment. It's staying in your lane. No swerving left for validation. No swerving right for comfort. No chasing. No wasting. In the V-zone, you build emotional credit instead of emotional debt. You move with intention instead of impulse. You stop trying to prove yourself through sex. You stop staying where you know you don't belong. You become disciplined. You become clear. You become dangerous in the right way, because now you're centered. The V principle teaches you how to recognize when you're drifting left or drifting right, and how to correct it quickly. It's never about not messing up. It's about not living years out of alignment. And that's the framework. The V-trap shows you the problem, V-Raw gives you the tool, and the V-zone shows you how to live. And, starting with the next episode, I'm going to start bringing on men to share real stories that hopefully will bring some insight, some healing to people, to themselves, as we all try to move forward and be better than who we are. I love a quote: when we try to become better than who we are, everything around us becomes better. I have daughters, and, when I had my first daughter, that was the beginning part of my healing, a phase of my healing, because I knew that I would be the first example that she would look at in, as far as how men are to treat women. And so for me, that was it for me. I had to start having that awareness, but I didn't completely stop. I've been caught up in this trap for so many years. I'm not a person that says I woulda, coulda, shoulda, but in reflection, now let me close it on this. I'll give you a story. I lived with an NBA player years ago, and one of my other friends lived with him as well. But this is just one example, one story, how the V-trap can get you off focus. And if you're focused and aligned, you will accomplish things. But if you are chasing and wasting, you're going to stay stuck in that trap. As when I was living with this NBA player, I had so much access and so many resources to really do some things to move forward in life. But instead of using the resources and access that I had, I used those things in the right way. I used that opportunity to get more women, to chase, to feel validated. We're doing this, we're doing that. Meanwhile, the other person who was living with this player, used that opportunity to focus and to really create opportunities and wealth for himself. And he now is, owns several Ritz, hotels, co-owner of several Ritz hotels, because he was focused, and I'm telling you, men and women, if you do not stay focused on your path and you get caught up in the chasing, you will waste time. Instead of chasing, I should have been building relationships instead of chasing, sex. And that's what happens. We lose focus. And this V trap is deadly. I've seen many men lose so many things in their life, their careers, their families, based off of being caught up in this V trap. So this V principle is such an important movement, and I'm grateful that God has put it on my heart, because now I'm living by that code even more, with more awareness now. I'm walking in my path. I've sabotaged so much in my life that it's time to stay focused, and stay on the path, stay in alignment, stay within that V zone. So if this podcast is something that you feel like you're going to learn from, that you feel like you need, something that you feel like is so necessary, please continue to watch. Please continue to support. Please continue to share. And also, make sure you hit the link down below and order a signed copy of my new book, The V Principle. It's coming out. It's out, actually, and I ordered copies. So when they come in, I'll sign them and I'll mail them to you. But hit the Square account if you want to order a book, a signed copy, and join me and other men and others on this incredible journey as we start healing and start doing the work to get out of the V-trap. Once again, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And I'm your host, Ivory Hunter. Have a beautiful day. God bless you.